illustrate the concept that I try to explain in this slide about the flexibility in design with views and some of the gotchas involved with it. So this example, I'm going to use the AP database. I'm going to go to one of my existing views. Here's one that I created from a previous example in a tutorial, and it's just called Vendor Basics. If I look at this view, I highlight the entire view here, which is minified. Click on Beautify SQL. It's going to give me a nice indented syntax so it's easier to read. And as you can see, this view is just pulling from the vendors table, and we have a restriction of only showing vendors in the state of California. And we have 5 columns that I want to display. So in the view, I get to control which columns are displayed and are going to be utilized by the user who calls this view. As you can see here, I have a vendor name, and the alias is my vendor. So whenever anybody refers to this view and they want to get the vendor name, they're going to have to query on the my vendor alias in order to get that. So if I run this query, I get a very simple output. And let's say that I changed the name of the vendor name in the vendors table. So let's say somebody had a requirement for me to change a column. So I'm going to go into the vendors table and make that change. You can see here that the vendor name, let's say somebody asked me to change that. Maybe it was my boss or a group of database designers decided to change the name of this column. If I save that and I go back to my view and I try to run this view again, I go into preview, you see that I get an error down here saying that the vendor name is no longer in a field list. So I need to update that column to reflect what's actually in the vendors table. So now vendor name primary is what we changed in the table. If I run this query again, now it outputs once again. The key to understand here is that if somebody is going to be using the vendor basic view in a programming language, say PHP or Java, they would be referring to the view, and when they needed to get the vendor name, they would just refer to the my vendor column alias. All right, so notice that that did not change. I made a change to the table in vendors here, and I did not have to change the alias. So what that means is that if any code that's using this view would still be referring to my vendor. I just wanted to point out that if something changes at the base level of the base table, then you're going to have to update that as well. Otherwise, the view will fail. Also notice that in this vendors table, I have 12 columns, and in my view, I only have 5. So I get to control what gets exposed, which columns, right, and also which data. So in this case, I'm only exposing the vendors in the state of California. So that's what views are good for. This is a very simple example. Usually views are a little bit more complex. They may have joins, they may have subqueries, but the bottom line is you get to decide how the view gets used by determining which columns are exposed and even naming them to your convention, so that you don't have to make as many changes at the code level, and again, in a PHP or a Java application that's using this view. Hope that makes sense.